Hello, my name is LaKisha Ledbetter Anderson, and I am one of the founding members and managing attorney at Ledbetter Anderson and Associates LLC. Today I am talking to you about expunctions. Did you know that the law provides for some criminal records to be cleared, non-disclosed, or sealed? Don't let your past hold you back any longer. Everyone's situation is different, so call us today to determine your eligibility. Attorneys are standing by to help you take the first step in restoring your hope, your dreams, your future, your life. Call us today at 832-464-6292 if you are in the Texas area, and if you are in Missouri, call us at 816-200-1317. Thank you. We look forward to speaking with you, and congratulations on taking the first step to restoring your life.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. As Reverend Bradford had mentioned, my name is LaKisha Ledbetter Anderson. I am one of the attorneys with Ledbetter Anderson and Associates LLC. I am born and raised in the Kansas City, Missouri area, and I have practiced law for 14 years. I've handled a variety of cases in that 14 years, everything from family law to estate plan or legacy planning, which I like to refer to it because this is the type of plan you prepare for your loved ones after you go on to glory. And if done correctly, this process can be smooth and a less stressful transition for those you leave behind. But I digress. So I've handled an array of cases in criminal, civil defense, landlord, tenant, um, bankruptcy, tax litigation, etc. I consider myself to be the people's lawyer, everyday people. And today, I've been invited to discuss expunctions in criminal records. My firm decided to launch this project we've entitled Destroying Criminal Records to Restore Lives, out of just kind of witnessing things that along the way when we were representing cases or clients in our criminal cases. And many times at the very outset, um, we would always see what we could do for our clients in the very beginning and to preserve their criminal record. And to me, that's the best time to think about whether it's an expunction or a non-disclosure or whatnot, is to think about it at the very beginning when that client is facing those criminal charges. It doesn't mean that you can't get an expunction if that wasn't contemplated at that time, but that is to me the best time to think about it. And so um, we choose to believe that most people want to be good people. They want to show up and be the best versions of themselves every day. Sometimes we believe this to a fault, but we choose to continue to believe that about people. So out of that labor of love, this project was born. We have a very high goal of trying to help at least 1,000 people by the end of this year restore their criminal backgrounds, if and at all possible. But I want you guys to ask questions, get involved, stop me if something pops up. I want this to be more of a discussion. I don't want to talk at you, I want to talk with you. So if you have a question, please unmute yourself, jump in there and ask me a question. It's not a problem at all. But let's get into why we are here. Okay. Some of you may be wondering, all right, let me make sure my slides are. Here we go. All right, some of you may be wondering, what is an expunction? Or some of you may be saying to yourselves, well, I've heard the word expunction. I'm familiar with an idea of an expunction, but I'm just not sure how it works in practice. I'm not sure if it applies to me or my loved one, or how long the process takes. What are the benefits of an expunction? And am I even eligible to receive an expunction? So we're going to cover those topics today. So let's start with, what is an expunction? An expunction is simply just a legal process to remove a criminal conviction or a criminal charge from a person's record to seal or destroy the state's record of arrest, charge, and or conviction. Simply put, an expunction is a lawsuit that you are filing against the state to have a judge order the state to get rid of those records. So when you apply for jobs, housing, or whatnot, when they run your criminal history, this particular offense that is included in this petition is not allowed to be disclosed. It won't exist in some instances. They are not allowed to go in and look at it. Whoever is disseminating your criminal information, your criminal history, is not allowed to pass that information along to the requester who is requesting your criminal history. It also gives you the ability to answer those criminal history questions in the negative. And so if it asks, have you ever been arrested? You are now allowed to say no. If it asks, have you ever been convicted of a particular offense? You are now allowed to say no legally. Now, why do you need an expunction? Well, most people don't really understand the collateral consequences that come along with the conviction. And just to give you an idea, there are over 40,000 collateral consequences nationwide. Many of these consequences prevent individuals from finding work, housing, and keep them from starting their own businesses in some instances. Nearly 72% of the collateral consequences that exist impact employment opportunities specifically. Missouri has approximately 700 laws that serve as barriers to employment or affect a person's overall ability to re-enter society. Of the approximate 700 laws, roughly 73% of those are permanent barriers, meaning meaning you're basically going to carry around this conviction or this mistake like a ball and chain for the rest of your life unless you take action, unless you do something about it. Some of these collateral consequences are things like lack of job opportunity or the lack of job advancement or just affecting your confidence when you are applying for jobs. Many people believe, oh, I have this particular. Many people have a sense of, or they lack confidence when they're applying for jobs. And so they find themselves limiting themselves on what jobs they should apply for, what jobs they can accept because they feel they have this criminal blemish or they have this past on their criminal history. And many times people are not aware that when they take plea bargains or whatnot, that having certain offenses on your criminal background can affect your access to housing. Some landlords will not allow tenants to rent property from them if they have a criminal background. People who are recipients of public housing or housing vouchers, if anyone on your lease picks up a criminal offense, it can jeopardize your ability to access your current housing. And in some instances, either the person who has the criminal offense has to leave the property or the whole family has to leave the property. And I think we can all agree that that can make a very difficult situation, especially if you have grandchildren that are living with you, or it's a spouse, or it's a child, or simply yourself. It can create a huge hardship. Having a criminal background can also limit your access to financial aid. There are certain criminal offenses that will preclude you from receiving financial aid to be able to pay for college or a community college or trade school, any sort of government assisted financial aid that you may be entitled to if you have a criminal history. And there are certain offenses on that criminal history, it can preclude your ability to do that. I think we're all familiar with the limitations on your right to vote, your limitation on your right to purchase or possess a firearm. But there are also limitations on being able to access business and occupational licensing. Many of you may not know that even if you wanted to purchase a property at one of the tax foreclosure sales or just a general foreclosure sale, you can't apply to bid at one of those foreclosure sales if you have a criminal background. And there are certain offenses on that criminal background. So now let's discuss who is eligible. I am going to talk a lot about Missouri right now because believe that most of us are in the Missouri area. And so Missouri is pretty lenient when it comes to states as far as offenses that are eligible for expunction. Missouri does have a list of offenses that are not eligible for expunction. And so it's important for you to consult with a licensed attorney like myself to assist you in that determination. There are waiting periods, and depending on the class of offense that you were charged or convicted of, you do have to wait a certain amount of time before you are eligible to expunge that offense. You cannot pick up any new offenses during that waiting period. And there are limits on the number of offenses that you can have expunged. If we're talking felony offenses, Missouri only allows you to expunge one felony offense. So if there's someone that has multiple offenses on their history, it's important to sit down with the lawyer and assess which one of the offenses out of the ones that are on your criminal history would be the one to prevent you or hinder you from being able to access your goals. And once you do that, then you will go and attack that particular offense. If it is a misdemeanor, Missouri allows me to misdemeanors. In the state of Texas, though, you are not eligible to expunge convictions. So if you have a conviction on your background in the state of Texas, you cannot get an expunction. You have to have a certain type of dismissal in the state of Texas to get an expunction, which is why I say Missouri is pretty lenient when it comes to expunctions because they are allowing you to expunge convictions. So let's talk about what happens if you do not do an expunction. If you decide that I'm not going to do an expunction, then you are essentially saying it's okay for some of those collateral consequences that we discussed earlier to continue to hold you back. You're going to continue to face obstacles when you are trying to obtain housing. Job opportunities and career advancement, there could be some barriers there. Many times people with criminal backgrounds, they feel stuck, they feel limited, they feel like they're in a box, they can't really get past this thing that happened to them in the past. But, and then many people just think that, well, I won't do it because I heard that after 7 years or after a certain amount of time that this criminal record, the offense on my criminal background would just fall off. That's just simply not true. So if you've been told that, or you've heard that, or you've heard somebody repeat that, please do not repeat it again. It is misinformation. If you receive a conviction, that conviction will stay on your criminal history for the rest of your life. And many of these collateral consequences that we talked about, majority of them are in place indefinitely. So if you can do something about it, why not? So I've said a lot. I'm gonna pause here for just a second just to see if there are any questions. Kind of let people digest that information. It's a lot of information at one time. So if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to jump in. Don't be shy.
You said in Texas that it's hard to get an expunction in Texas? Or is it possible regardless of whether or not you do have a criminal background?
In the state of Texas, it's not necessarily hard to get an expunction. The thing that is difficult is if you have a conviction, Texas doesn't allow you to expunge convictions. We have another procedure that Texas allows called non-disclosures. But even with a non-disclosure, your case has to be worked out a particular way. There are additional waiting periods after your case is dismissed. And in Texas, we have different types of dismissals. And if your dismissal doesn't fall within the category of dismissals that would allow you an expunction is not an option for you. So essentially in the state of Texas, your case has to be worked out in a way in which you get the appropriate type of dismissal, and then you can apply for an expunction.
Okay.
But in the state of Missouri, even if you have a conviction, as long as you're not convicted of an offense that's on that list of offenses that are ineligible. It doesn't matter how your cases worked out. You could have went to jail. You could have spent 10 or 3 or 4 years in jail. And as long as you do what you're supposed to do in that waiting period and don't pick up any offenses, and your offense isn't one that's on that list of ineligible offenses, you can get an expunction, which is why I consider Missouri to be a little bit more lenient.
Okay, LaKisha Al, you made the statement that it has been said that if I just wait 7 years, the record would just fall off and not have to worry about it. And you said that that was misleading. Well, I believe there's several people who in their younger days did some dumb stuff and not realize that it may still be on their record. So are you telling me if I did something at 18 or 21 years of age, and then I'm at 30 years of age now, and I'm trying to do something, that something on my record can still come up if it has not been expunged because it didn't fall off, that I'm still being prosecuted after all those years for that, I'll say, crime, misdemeanor, or felony?
That is absolutely true. And so that's why I'm saying, please don't repeat that misinformation. Your criminal history is your criminal history. Most people don't know that just like when you're born, you have a social security number. Just like when you're born, you also have an FBI number. That's called a SPIN, and everybody has one. You never know what your SPIN is until you find yourself in a situation where you've had a run-in with the criminal justice process. But everybody has one, and so criminal offenses, unless they are expunged, do not go away.
Wait a
Every
minute.
arrest that you've ever had is still there.
Did I just hear you say that? Just like I'm given a social security number, that I'm also given a FBI number? Did I hear that? Is that what you said?
Essentially, yes.
Wow.
Mrs. Anderson, so what's the timeline like? If I'm looking for an expunction or trying to clear my records, how long does that take? What's the process?
Good question. It leads me into my next slide. So, in about a 20 to 30-minute consult with one of the attorneys in our office, we should be able to determine your eligibility for an expunction. And sometimes it's less than that 20 to 30 minutes, but that during that consult, we really dig into. Perfect. Okay, well, I'll start over for those who couldn't hear me initially, but in about a 20 to 30-minute consult, we should be able to determine your eligibility for an expunction. And during that consult, just to kind of give you an idea, we look up your case. We go through any offenses that you do have. If it's one offense, that's wonderful. It makes it a lot easier to determine your eligibility. If there are multiple offenses, we do evaluate if we can expunge all of those off, depending on the level of offense we're looking at expunging, if we can expunge multiple offenses, or if we only have to pick one, which one would be the best one to expunge. In most instances, depending on, some choices that you make and how quickly you make those choices, we can file your petition. We can draft and file a petition the same day. In some cases, it's generally about a day. Assuming that it doesn't fall on a weekend. But we can generally get you filed. And what that means is we actually file your lawsuit with the state. And so you will get a case number. You typically get a setting. In the state of Missouri, they're pretty quick about setting hearings. Generally, those hearings are set about 30 days or so from the date of filing. And during that time frame, notice is provided to all of the agencies that we list in your petition. So when we file your petition, we're suing each agency that's listed and asking the judge to order them to get rid of your criminal record. So, and then the state and those agencies have about 30 days to object to our petition. After that 30 days is up, we go to court, we argue your petition before the judge. And if the judge agrees with us that you are entitled to an expunction, and just so you all know, these expunctions are generally a matter of right. So if you meet all the criteria of the statute, there really is no reason for your petition to be denied. So that's one of the things we do in the very beginning of this process is we determine if we are going to have areas where we need to beef up argument or whatnot, then we will do that. But at the argument phase, we are in court, we are arguing your petition before a judge. And after that, that same day, the judge generally signs an order expunging your record if he or she agrees with our position. I usually tell my clients to give it about 30 days after the order is signed, because once the judge signs that order has to start to be circulated back to all of those agencies, so those agencies can start the process of removing or non-disclosing your criminal record in the system. And once that is done, you can then say from that point forward, I am no longer, bound by that particular offense. And in most instances, the clients that I have done expunctions for have gone on and been very successful, have done great things. They feel a sense of relief once that expunction is complete. And so they feel free, so to speak, as are some of the testimonies that I've received. Are there any questions?
Have you had any difficult expunction? Have you done any recently? What are you saying from the courts?
I have in Missouri. In Missouri, I've seen them move pretty quickly, and those have gone pretty smooth. In Texas, I have run into a few issues where they want to argue whether statute of limitations and statute of limitations, for those who don't know, are the time frame for which the state can file or refile criminal charges after they dismiss a case. And so I've had to have some argument about whether statute of limitations is an issue or not, and whether my client is entitled to an expunction at that particular time. I don't want to jinx myself, but I've been successful in getting even the difficult ones and being successful in getting orders of expunction on those cases and winning those arguments. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'll stick around for a little bit if someone wants to ask questions, but my personal information is here. Phone numbers are listed for both Missouri and Texas. I want to thank each of you for taking time out this evening to join in and listen to this presentation on expunctions. If you know someone who needs an expunction, please do not hesitate to pass our information along. This is something that everyone can really benefit from. Does someone have a question?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
Okay. Hey, my question is, now on the expunction, does that go by each individual offense, or does it go by the individual's name and their identification in the penal system?
Let me make sure I understand your question. What I think you're asking me is there a separate expunction for each offense, or is it if one person files an expunction that takes care of everything on their criminal history? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So no, it goes by each individual offense. So in the state of Missouri, you're only allowed a certain number of offenses. If it's a felony, you're allowed one felony expunction.
Okay.
If you have multiple offenses, then we need to look at your criminal history and determine which one would be the best one to go after.
Okay.
And I've had a case like that recently where I had an individual who had a couple of felony offenses. And so we went with one that most people would consider to be a crime of moral turpitude. And what that really means is, what does the offense itself, when the general public hears the offense, does it convey to them something of deceit, something of violence, something that says that you would be a risk to their company? And generally, that's what we use to weigh which offense would be best to explain.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
LaKisha, Thank you. This is helpful. I know there must be, with everyone that's on this call, with all the folks here, we probably each know one or two people who desperately need this to get an apartment, to get a house, to get that job they've been applying for. So thank you for this time, and I'll definitely make note of your number in the comment sections below to make sure I spread the word. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, LaKisha, I'm grateful for you to do this. I learned some things myself on that, and I appreciate you starting this off this thankful, thoughtful Thursday. I also appreciate you giving me the name for that. But I think I can hold a different conversation with people too, because I didn't really think about some of the things you mentioned about being able to get going for rentals, buying a home, and different things that our record follows on. And then the troubling issue that sometimes we forget ourselves that when we were young, we've done some dumb things and it can still be sitting there, and it probably can only be one thing. So I think here, and some of the people on here might be afraid to ask the question, but I want to say to everybody, the only bad question is the one that's never asked. And there's no dumb question that you can ask. You got the authority, the attorney online now that can answer your questions. So feel free and don't hold back anything because she donated her time for us. So if anybody else like to say something, the time to speak.
I heard you mentioned criteria. What criteria do you have to meet?
Criteria for an expunction, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay. So generally in the state of Missouri, as long as it can be a conviction, it can be an arrest, it can be somebody used your name and picked up a bunch of criminal offenses. And the procedure for each is a little different. So I'll stick to mainly the convictions because that seems to be the one that most people call about. And so you have to not have one of those offenses that is considered ineligible. The list is very long. I wouldn't be able to name all of the offenses if I wanted to, but I do have a little cheat sheet that I like to use just so that I can reference it pretty quickly. In Missouri, like I said, if it's a felony, the waiting period is about 7 years from the date that you finish your sentence. And for a misdemeanor, the waiting period is 3 years. You have to have paid all of your court fines, court costs, and restitution. Um, and if you are one of those people that likes to wait and pay the fines until much later, I would advise you to pay them off as soon as possible because your waiting period could be affected if you don't pay them close to the time your case is disposed. And you should not have been found guilty or pled guilty to an offense during that waiting period. So if you have some offenses before that particular offense, that's fine. And then in some instances, we can look at the date of filing and count backwards 3 or 7 years, depending on the level of offense that we're dealing with, and determine whether or not you're eligible for that expunction. And so calculating time and computing at time sometimes can be a little tricky depending on what your particular situation is. But generally, those are the general qualifications to determine whether or not you're eligible in the state of Missouri. In the state of Texas, like said before, you have to have a certain type of dismissal in order to be eligible for an expunction. If you did what we call a deferred adjudication or any other type of deferred probation, that generally knocks you out of the box for being eligible for an expunction unless it was an offense that you committed as a minor. Uh, and then there are different rules and eligibility criteria for if you committed an offense as a minor. In the state of Texas, that's 17. In the state of Missouri, it's 17 as well. So once you're turned 17, and if you are have any run-in with the law, you will be tried or charged as an adult. Anything under that, you will be charged generally, unless it's a really egregious offense, you will be tried as a juvenile. And generally, juvenile records are generally confidential, but there are still instances in which you want to go ahead and get rid of the juvenile record. If you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a realtor or a CPA or a nurse practitioner, a CNA, many times that criminal history, even from your juvenile period, can come back and haunt you. If you want to be a dentist, any sort of occupation where you need a license to really do that occupation, your criminal history is going to be really, really, really important. So if you can take care of that now is the time to do so.
Okay, during your statement, you mentioned that if somebody used your identity, so that could mean that I could have information on my record that I didn't know that was even there. So is it a good idea every once in a while I have somebody to run your name and information to make sure that there's nothing on your record?
Yeah, I think that's a prudent thing to do, but as far as making it absolutely necessary, if you find that you've applied for something or and you've been rejected and you're not understanding why, then yes, I would think that you need to go ahead and see what's going on. I'll give you an example. I had a client who about a year or so ago who had a very common name, and for confidentiality purposes, we'll just say this person's name is Joe Smith. And so Joe Smith, it had a very common name. Joe Smith's background got mixed with another Joe Smith's background. They had different middle names. Their socials were very similar. They were off a few digits, but for whatever reason, when they would run their backgrounds, whether it was credit, criminal, or otherwise, their records would get crossed in when the computer is basically spitting back out the report. And so my Joe Smith was being accused of having evictions and other issues, and this other Joe Smith was getting the use and benefit of my client's pristine background, so to speak. And then my client was suffering from the other Joe Smith's blemished background, so to speak. And so I filed a lawsuit in federal court on her behalf and retrieved a pretty good penny for her based on this issue, because she had tried numerous times on her own to get this corrected, and it just wasn't corrected. Every time she would run into something, she'd have to pay additional deposits, or in order to get housing, she would she would be denied things, and she was really just running into all of these roadblocks along the way. After we won that particular lawsuit, we received information from the company that houses a lot of this criminal history, rental history, credit history, background, that they would change their algorithm so to help prevent her record from being mixed with this other person's record. And so, she hasn't run into. I haven't had any phone calls that she's run into any problems since then, but it does happen. And so there are situations where not necessarily someone is used, like you had an issue of identity theft, but there are situations where your history, it gets mixed with someone else's history, especially if it's a similar name. And sometimes it happens when there's a senior and a junior, or a first, second, and third, they have the exact same name. Sometimes that happens too, because it's not a physical person that's usually going through these records and saying, oh, all of these convictions belong to this person and all of these convictions belong to someone else, or this person has no convictions. It's usually a computer. And it's an algorithm that they put in these computer systems that spit out this information. But there are situations where people have their identity has been stolen and people have committed offenses in their names, and there are ways to get those records expunged as well. So if you find that you're having some issues getting things, or people are denying things, you can always ask, and you can always ask to see the report and see what's on the report. You're entitled to that, especially if they're going to make some sort of adverse decision against you. You're always entitled to see what the reason is. The sad thing, though, is generally when it's for employment, they generally send you a blank letter that really doesn't give you a whole lot of information other than, oh, we've decided to go with someone else and we wish you the best. But if you've been offered a position and the only thing that they're waiting on is criminal history information, and that criminal history comes back and they're denying that job because your criminal history, because there's something that came back on your criminal history, you are entitled by law to receive a report as to what is on that criminal history, so that you have an opportunity to dispute the information that's on there, or have the ability to find out what you need to do to correct it if there is incorrect information on there. But if the information is correct, you can then start to research your avenues to rectify that. And one of those things is an expunction if we're talking about history. Sorry, that was a really long explanation.
Well, if not, LaKisha, thank you.
I pray for my homies out there. Please